Welcome to the What's Next in Product Management panel. I'm Judy Chang. I'm a director of product at Google, and I'm super thrilled to be here today with three very talented and accomplished women who collectively bring decades of PM experience. They have so much wisdom to share, and I can't wait to get started with you. First off, we have Tal Oppenheimer. She's the head of product for client apps at Grammarly. Sandy Edwards, who's Director of PM for QuickBooks Workforce Solutions, which is a mouthful, at Intuit. And then Becky Ash, who's the Head of Product Ops at Fullstory. Thanks for joining me today, ladies. Let's talk first about what's happening today in the industry. We've had waves of layoffs. How do these layoffs impact PMs? Do you want to get us started, Tal?
Sure. I'm happy to jump in here a little bit. First, just acknowledging the fact that I think pretty much everyone in the industry has been impacted in some capacity with the layoffs, whether directly folks on extended teams, especially as PMs who work incredibly cross-functionally, or just even knowing people in the industry that were impacted. And I know it's a really challenging time across the board. I personally think that one thing that's really fascinating about this particular combination of events is just a lot of industry trends that have shifted in this time as well. We do see a lot of layoffs, which does mean a tremendous amount of really amazing talent looking for new opportunities. We also see a huge stepwise change in technology right now with LLMs and generative AI and otherwise. And I do think if you look both at historically what's happened during some of these combinations and kind of the ingredients we have right now, there's just going to be a huge potential for an increase in the number of new startups and kind of new big players that emerge. So I'd be very surprised if 5 years from now there weren't some huge new players that really started in part from this round of just amazing talent thinking about new problems with new technologies.
I think that's a really great point, Tal. I think a big part of using this time well is to make sure that we're practicing our craft. I think that your point around technology changing a lot just gives us ample time to learn to do new things, especially in that AI space. And so it's a great time to practice your craft, to get involved in new ideas that you've wanted to work on for a while, and just hone your skills while you have the time if you are impacted as you continue to job seek. I think one of the big things that was just remarkable about this is in the blink of an eye, we went from what was a job seekers market to a hiring managers market kind of overnight. And I think we all were caught off guard by that. It shifted overnight. And no matter what role you're playing, whether you're a hiring manager, whether you're currently seeking, I think it overly impacted women because I know a lot of women that were taking time off for family reasons, had planned to be able to come back and find a role relatively easily. And the market has just shifted underneath their feet. So I do think it does impact a lot of us as women. And I just, again, encourage you to practice your craft. If it's hard to find a role right now, just do your best to practice craft and learn as much as you can.
Nothing sort of novel or incremental to add here, but just really echoing Tal's point, I think there's reason to be optimistic about what's on the other side of this really tough kind of market moment that we're in. I expect there will be a bit of a startup renaissance on the other side. Even Fullstory several years ago was an example of a startup that was founded by ex-Googlers when Google closed an Atlanta office. So I think definitely some reason to be optimistic on the other side of this.
Yeah, it is such a bad feeling to get laid off. I remember getting laid off on my daughter's first birthday was a day where I had dropped off the car at a car shop to get repaired. So I couldn't even leave the office and get back in my car. I had to take my box of belongings and wait to get picked up. And I'll just never forget that feeling. But out of it, it just forced me to do some things that were outside of my comfort zone, get reconnected with former colleagues, and just push myself to really reinvent what did I want to do next. And it ended up being an opportunity, but in the moment, it felt so bad. And so I feel for everybody who has been laid off and is going through that. Tell me, did you have something to add, Sandy?
Yeah, it was what you had said just brought up another point, which is I love the push when you are impacted, it drives innovation. If you're not impacted, it can make it scary to take risks, right? And so in the current roles, when we're lucky enough to have a role right now, it can have an adverse impact on our ability to be daring and take a risk, take on a different role, try something new, because the stakes feel really high right now. And so I think that was a great opportunity. And also knowing that for those of us that are lucky enough to still have a role, it impacts us in that way also.
Yes, definitely. Let's talk about what big changes you've seen over the last 5 years in PM. And Becky, maybe you start us off this time.
Sure. Yeah, I think this is not necessarily a kind of brand new in the last 5 years, but I think it's become particularly prominent and important the last 5 years, is an ability for PMs to leverage big data in a continuously intelligent way. One example of kind of a space where that applies, I think, to almost every PM is a really interesting emergence of customer feedback intelligence tools that allow us to harness a ton of big data, identify kind of patterns and trends in that data that we can really optimize and leverage the time that we do have with customers, with prospects, to understand the market in a smarter way. The other thing I would say is there is such a rapid kind of change in product categories today, expansion, overlap, consolidation. And I think the importance of a really strong product instinct and crisp peripheral vision of what's going on in that category with competitors and kind of adjacent products is really critical in this moment and has become more so in the last 5 years.
Yeah, and I think building off of that a little bit, especially with just the rapid amount of change of external factors, I think the competitive landscape for most industries has changed in some manner in the last 5 years. And I think with that, as a PM, kind of building off of your point on that sort of intuition aspect as well, is the importance of disambiguating the signal from the noise with those external factors, right? There are hype waves. There's a lot of energy and excitement that can come from a lot of things. Oftentimes there's amazing insights or takeaways from those things. And sometimes there's also a lot of noise. And so being able to know what to do with all that information as well, and how to take that into account to the strategies you're building, the teams and otherwise. And I think for me, looking at the last 5 years, the other very big change is what executing as a PM looks like in a, post the start of COVID world, where a lot of companies have shifted to fully remote, partially remote, various combinations, and just some of the nuts and bolts of PMing suddenly look different. You're no longer in person with your team, at least not all the time. And that does mean that just executing as a PM in a very cross-functional role is just fundamentally different than it was 5 years ago.
I think it's changing so much again, just as we speak, right? With the big entrance of generative AI on the landscape, it's also changing the way that we execute. It's going to have a massive impact, not only on how we do our role as a PM, meaning writing product requirements, writing briefs, writing 6-pagers. It also is going to change how we design products, right? And so we're right now in my organization looking really closely at how we can quickly help our PMs get the skills that they need to build AI first products, or to use AI in new ways, or to use machine learning in new ways. And so I think that is a interesting, very recent evolution that kind of accelerates the big data comment and the changes with COVID. I mean, it's been a very dynamic time in the last 5 years to be a product manager. And I know personally, I'm so happy to be a part of it, because I think in 15, 20 more years, I'll look back and be like, wow, I got to be there at the forefront, like it would be for people that were here when product managers when the internet hit the scene for us, right? It's going to be that big of a change, and I'm just really love being a part of it. So.
Yeah, so let's build on that a little bit. Sandy, you're touching on what Gen AI may do to change the PM role. Let's fast forward 5 years. What does the role of PM look like in 5 years? Any guesses?
I think it's a fun thing to think about for sure, right? I think right now, I think our roles are going to dramatically change. I spend a lot of time coaching my product managers on people skills, because I think the role of people skills and the role of influencing, the role of leading is just going to become more and more important, to make persuasive arguments, to learn to write concisely and clearly. A lot of the work that we did technically is going to get has been replaced by data, or is being replaced by Gen AI. And so we have to think about what skills are going to be relevant for us in the future. I kind of equate it to, I have a I have a daughter who's 21, and I have a son in the middle, and then I have an 8-year-old son. And the skills that I thought were important for my 21-year-old at this age are not relevant anymore, and are really, so now it's really making me wonder, like, what as an 8-year-old do you need to learn today that's going to serve you when you enter the job force? And I feel like that's for us, for PMs right now. The skills that we're used to doing, that we're used to learning our craft, are going to change dramatically. And it's up to us now as product leaders to figure out what those skills are that we're going to need in the future and start teaching our teams that.
And I think, sure, yeah, building off of that a little, sorry, just to jump in there. I think that there's, to what you highlighted early, Sandy, like the types of tools that you use are just changing because you now have this new tool available to you. So some of the tasks for writing, say, a product requirement doc in the PRD phase, the actual writing isn't necessarily going to be the challenging part, but it's all of the thought that goes behind it, right? The product intuition, the strategy across the board. And so, fast forward 5 years, I do think a lot of the, project management type aspects that are often inherent to part of a PM role will hopefully ideally become much lighter weight, much more automated, which then kind of clears out a lot of time for product managers to really focus on the creative side of things. And Gen AI can also still help in that as kind of even a brainstorm buddy in some of those areas, which again is kind of this new tool to help you in each of those phases. But a lot of those aspects really become critical across the board. And I think the other part that really stands out to me is just the huge open green field of new product problems that we can actually solve with the technology. So not just helping with the craft of PMing, but also just, there's no shortage of user problems out there. And there's now this pretty phenomenal new technology that can open up a lot of new ways to actually solve those problems across the board. And I think that, to your point, that's incredibly exciting to have those combinations of things, of parts of the job being streamlined and sort of new tools to learn, and being able to apply those tools to actually build great things for people as well.
I love the brainstorm buddy term that you just used. I'm definitely going to steal that. I think kind of building on top of that, one of the differentiators, if I can look into the future 5 years from now, for PMs that succeed in this space is really knowing the right questions to ask and how to dig into those problem spaces in an innovative and instinctual way. Talking about ChatGPT or more Gen AI tools, for example, if every PM enters the same prompt about tell me how I should think about product onboarding or something like that, we'll end up running at the same problem in the same way. And I think the PMs that will excel in this space are those that really understand how to ask the right questions and then use their instinct and judgment, sort of brainstorm buddy, instead of just taking what pops out as fact, to approach that problem space or solution in a better way, in a different way. And in addition to that, those that are hyper aware of the limitations of Gen AI and this type of tooling and keep their finger on the pulse of that. And I think the only way to prepare for that today means being an early adopter, rolling up your sleeves, getting your hands dirty with it, and kind of, learning by doing.
I love this idea of so many tasks being able to be outsourced, like the project management and the launch approvals and all the things that most PMs don't like as part of their job. And I want to ask a little bit more, Becky, about this notion of product instinct. What does that look like in our brave new world? How do we develop this kind of instinct when we're changing from PMs who do everything to PMs who are focusing more on strategy and less so on execution?
Great question. I think one of the best ways to kind of flex that muscle a bit is through diagnosis of tools that or products that you use in your day to day. I think one telltale sign of somebody with really strong product instinct is being able to diagnose what worked, what was lovable about a particular product. So, I don't think there's shame in kind of borrowing tactics of things that worked from other products, of course, in a unique way for your company. But really understanding wow, this growth strategy for this product was incredible. Why? What about it worked? Really digging into the root cause there. And at the same time, avoiding pitfalls or being hyper aware of kind of what is not lovable, what is not working, what is not a positive user experience or a good growth strategy. So I would say that peripheral vision is really important, and the ability to diagnose and get to the root cause of why something worked or didn't work is critical.
Yeah, I often think of, product instinct or just instinct in any kind of domain as to some extent a way to just short circuit learning as quickly as possible. And that can come from pattern matching, right? Breaking down the data that you do have to understand like what about it made it work or not work, and then being able to apply that to a different situation. And I think in terms of like how you actually learn that as a PM or really in any industry really also depends on how you personally learn, right? Some that's through a lot of case studies and reading, watching videos, kind of whatever it might be. Others, it might be, talking through it with people, right? Asking the questions, having that back and forth. Others, it might be trying and doing. And I think across the board, the, most important way to kind of fast forward on all of those aspects, regardless of how you learn, is just to kind of increase the quantity, whether that means learning from other people, getting examples of the case studies, or trying to get as much varied experience to be able to kind of connect the dots and build that instinct as well.
I love that, Tal. I think the thing that makes me what that makes me think about is because we've been building products in a very specific way for the last 5 or 10 years, have developed instincts from that. Now that the world is changing with generative AI, I wonder how that's going to impact the development of our product instincts, and potentially we need to develop different instincts that we gain from that. Like I know, again, kind of back to my kids, like what they're learning at a different age is very different now, and what I'm focusing on with my 8-year-old is very different now, and I would have never known to focus on that had it not been for the technology changes and kind of what's happening in the world and imagining where it's going to be. So I think that's a super important part of us as leaders, is helping imagine what that's going to be and start building in that direction, and cultivating those skills in our more junior and managers coming in, product managers coming in.
And Sandy, you mentioned earlier before, PMs were expected to be technical. That's no longer as much the case as having those soft skills, and we've seen that in changes that companies have made about requirements to interview as a PM. And so there's probably another wave coming of what companies will think the ideal PM looks like. That's even different from what we're looking at today. It's going to you will be less worried about like, can they ship stuff on time and follow rules X, Y, and Z, and more about how do they think about solving problems in a very holistic way, and synthesizing, as Tal and Becky mentioned, like this vast amount of data, while also being super collaborative and really good writers and able to communicate. So it's the role is going to change, right? It's going to look a little different.
Yeah, I think Becky said it at the beginning, which was like learning to ask the right questions is what's going to set people apart. And that comes from critical thinking skills, because now anybody's going to be able to put into ChatGPT, write me a product requirement stuff for blah, 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 right? Like I've been doing it myself. It's just spits it out and it's all right. It's pretty good, right? But to take it from good to fantastic, you have to ask more questions. You have to press in the right places. You have to help it connect the dots. And that's where our product thinking comes into play. And I think that is just going to become even more and more important in the way that we set ourselves apart.
I will say I also learned that you also have to, question the facts it gives you. I tried to use it to write my bio for women in product. I was like, let's see what it comes up with. It created a wonderful bio that was not at all correct. I even made a pretend LinkedIn link for me when I asked it to cite its sources. It was a wonderful bio, very aspirational, and not at all about me.
One thing, sorry, go ahead, Becky.
I was going to say, I think there is no avoiding a PM role being a Swiss Army knife. A PM role will always be a Swiss Army knife in any world. But the tools that are in that Swiss Army knife are going to be super different that we're looking for a few years from now. And I think part of that is, harping on the generative AI stuff. by nature, that is fed by things that already exist out in the world somewhere. And so really focusing on PMs who like have a vision for that greenfield and that strategy and are able to marry that with, what's fed with this information that's already out there in the world, I think will be critical.
Yeah, as you were talking about the developing of the instinct, one thing I was reflecting on is um, often at Google, we find ourselves just like kind of pounding our chests about all the good work we've done. And I've been asking the team to say, can we start with stuff that didn't work? Why didn't it work? What would we not do again next year at the top of the document when we do planning, instead of just talking about all the gains we had and like pushing all the failed things under the rug? And I found that to be incredibly helpful of just to reflect and go, oh yeah, we made like 3 wrong assumptions and that's why this enhancement didn't go, or we didn't talk to the right people to understand this other part of the problem. And I wonder in your organizations how you go about developing that product instinct on your teams. Is it something deliberate or is it something people pick up by osmosis?
Yeah, I think I have never really thought of it as an externalized that way. Like, how do I develop product instincts in my team? Because but it's an interesting provocation because maybe we need to be doing more of that because I think that is super important, especially as we think about what our PMs need for the future. And I think one of the things that you mentioned, it reminded me of something that I pushed for a long time, which is when we're doing our product work, always look for the opposite. Like I can find lots of data to support my hypothesis, but can I find any data that doesn't support it? Because that's really the true test. Is you can find a little bit of data to support it, but if you can find no data that refutes it, you have a much stronger case. The same thing with product strategy. The same thing with what you had said, like focusing on what didn't work and making sure we're learning from it, and we're maybe pulling stuff out of product or simplifying in a way that we can talk about that. It creates not only great product instinct, but also a really great culture for failure and an open learning culture, which I think is super important. And I think, Becky, I think you mentioned product strategy. And I just think that's another place that we as PM leaders can really start to build in our PMs more strongly. Because at least from my experience, when I recruit, product strategy is a weak point for a lot of our PMs coming in. And we're just there's not enough training out there. There's not enough education out there and enough coaching for how to create a clear, short, medium, and long-term product strategy. And so I think that's another place where thinking about what we need to do for our PMs and leaders would be a great place to overemphasize as we start to automate some of the other tasks we have.
I love the looking to see if there is data that refutes your hypothesis as a way to kind of stress test yourself. One of the things that we do at Fullstory is include kind of just name the risks that we know of so that they're front and center. We keep them in mind. I think that's similar, but I love the kind of data-driven approach that you suggested. The other thing I'll say is I think celebrating learning from failure or mistakes or deprioritizing things, that is such a cultural thing. One of the things that we've tried to do at Fullstory is really like shout those things from the rooftops as much as we can, especially because when we're trying to move quickly, we have finite resources. Like being focused and learning from mistakes is such a feat. And so I think that's a great area to focus.
Yeah, I think another example that I've seen a bit around the like risks and articulating that is even doing the postmortem before you start building the product, right? What are the reasons that this fails? And let's actually like write those out and like what steps will we take proactively to address those? Or are these risks too high that we actually doesn't make sense to invest in this right now? Another kind of more tactical and depending on the teams that we've done and tried out a little bit is for like our growth team that runs a lot of, A/B experiments or otherwise. We do like experiment readouts and actually we try to frame it as they show like, hey, A/B control or whatever it might be. And say like, this is what we're trying to optimize for. And actually like both to make it more interactive and to kind of start building that intuition is like, ask the group, like which do you think won? And then, actually show the experiments and the results and the conclusions from it. but it kind of creates that like, oh yeah, like you should have a hypothesis, test what you think might the outcome be, and then like, does it match up to what the actual results showed? And that like over time, the repetition of that can also kind of help hone in on the results and the intuition that can come from that as well.
Yeah, that's a fun way to get everybody really engaged too. So let's wrap it up. What can product leaders do to prepare for what's next? Do you have any advice? Becky, you want to start?
Sure. I think we touched on this a little bit before, but I really think that there will be a shift in kind of focus on hiring profile of those PMs that have, to Sandy's point, like stronger product strategy chops. And so I think that, thinking about where those folks might come from, what that hiring profile should look like, what questions are that would help kind of tease that out is really important to prepare.
Yeah, I think for me, one of the big takeaways, I think, for any phase is really just curiosity as one of the biggest toolkits for a PM. And that, that cheesy line, the only constant is change. And I think finding that as an energizing fact and really being curious and learning about whether it's the tools, the technology, the competitive landscape, kind of whatever it might be, as just an area to like dive into and learn as much as possible from.
I love that. And I'll steal a little bit from Becky, which is big data, right? Like big data feeds AI, feeds everything. If you don't have great data chops, get them. Take a class, learn about it, understand the power of data and what you can use it for and how you can use it to create insights and drive product strategy and do a lot of the stuff we talked about. That feeds right into your generative AI and how to leverage it because you need data to power that. And I think Becky, you said it too, early adopter. We should always be early adopters. We should be the ones signing up for the betas and trying different stuff out, even if it's not something you're particularly interested in, because you'll learn growth techniques. You'll learn new things that will inspire you, and you can start to think about how you can apply them to your own product problems every day. And then 3 for me, and I think I talked about this a lot, is just people skills. I spend a tremendous amount of time now coaching my team on people skills because I want great PMs to turn into great product leaders, which means they're great people leaders. And so helping them learn to give feedback, helping them learn to build a culture of feedback, driving great career coaching conversations, inspiring product strategy, all of that stuff, influencing, right? All of that is people skills that every leader needs, but especially product leaders if they want to be effective in their organization.
It's such an exciting time, and I love all the concrete advice you've given and the future that you're painting for PM, because I think it's just going to be so much fun to work in this new world. And I really want to thank you all, Tal, Sandy, Becky, for joining us today to talk about what's next in PM. I've learned so much from you. Thank you.
Thanks for
Thanks,
having us.
Judy. This was wonderful.